When you think of medieval Europe, what comes to mind? Brave knights, grand castles, and mountains of roasted meats, overflowing chalices of wine, and tables groaning under the weight of exotic pies? Hollywood and many of our childhood stories paint a picture of endless feasting, a culinary wonderland of indulgence. But was that really the whole story? Or even most of the story? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the medieval dinner plate. Forget the fantasy for a moment, and let's delve into the surprising, often challenging, and utterly fascinating reality of what people actually ate in medieval Europe. From the king's lavish banquets to the peasant's humble pottage, we're going to explore the grains that built a civilization, the spices that launched empires, and the strict rules that dictated every bite. Prepare to have your perceptions and perhaps your appetite delightfully challenged. If there was one food that defined the medieval diet, it wasn't meat or cheese or even vegetables. It was grain. Grains were the absolute cornerstone of survival, providing the bulk of calories for almost everyone, from the lowliest serf to the mightiest lord. The most common grains were wheat, rye, and barley. Oats were also prevalent, especially for animal fodder and some gruels. Your social status often dictated the kind of bread you ate. Peasants primarily consumed dark coarse bread, often made from rye or barley. This bread was dense, heavy, and incredibly filling, exactly what you needed for a day of hard labor in the fields. It was often baked in communal ovens, a vital part of village life. For the wealthier classes like merchants, knights, and nobility, wheat bread was preferred. The whiter the bread, the more refined it was considered, a sign of status and access to better milling techniques. Bread wasn't just food, it was your plate, your spoon, and often the main component of every meal. Let's imagine a typical day for a medieval peasant. Their lives revolved around the sun and the soil, and their diet reflected that. For them, the ultimate comfort food, the daily staple, was pottage. Think of pottage as a thick, hearty stew, simmering slowly over an open fire. It was a flexible dish, made from whatever was available: peas, beans, cabbage, leeks, onions, carrots, and parsnips. Meat, if any, was a rare addition, perhaps a bit of salted pork fat or a small piece of scavenged game. Herbs from the garden like parsley, sage, and thyme would add flavor. Pottage wasn't just a meal, it was a way of life. It was nutritious, easy to prepare in large batches, and provided the sustained energy needed for demanding physical labor. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner might all feature some variation of pottage, along with their ubiquitous bread. Now, let's step into the great hall of a medieval lord or king. Here, the culinary landscape was dramatically different. While grains were still present, meat took center stage. Roasted meats were a symbol of wealth and power. Wild game like venison, boar, and various birds, swans, peacocks, even herons, would be hunted from private forests and prepared with great fanfare. Domesticated animals such as beef, pork, and lamb were also consumed, though perhaps less frequently than poultry like chickens and geese. But it wasn't just the quantity of meat, it was the spices. Medieval nobility loved their spices. These were incredibly expensive, imported from distant lands like Asia and the Middle East, and using them liberally was a blatant display of wealth. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, nutmeg, and saffron were highly prized. They weren't just for flavor, some believed they had medicinal properties, and they certainly helped to preserve food and mask less than fresh odors. Religion played an enormous role in medieval life, and nowhere was this more apparent than in their diet. The Christian calendar dictated a strict rhythm of feast days and fast days. Fast days, often every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, as well as the entire Lenten period and Advent, meant abstaining from meat, eggs, and dairy products. On these days, fish became a primary source of protein. People living near coasts had access to fresh fish, but for those inland, salted or dried fish like cod and herring were incredibly important. These fast days amounted to roughly half the year, meaning that for large portions of their lives, medieval people were effectively eating a primarily plant-based and pescatarian diet, even the wealthy. Feast days, on the other hand, were opportunities for celebration and indulgence. On these occasions, the rules relaxed, and tables would groan under the weight of rich meats, fine wines, and elaborate dishes, reinforcing the social hierarchy and demonstrating the host's generosity and status. What did they drink to wash down all that bread and pottage? Water, of course, was essential, but it wasn't always safe. Contamination was a constant concern, especially in towns and cities. For many, the drink of choice was ale or beer. These were typically low in alcohol, brewed from barley or oats, and were often safer to drink than water because the brewing process killed off many harmful bacteria. Even children would drink weaker versions. For the wealthier classes, wine was a highly prized beverage. Vineyards were common in many parts of Europe, and wine was imported from warmer regions. Different types of wine, both red and white, were consumed, often diluted with water or spiced. Mead, a fermented honey drink, was also popular, especially in Northern Europe. What about sweets and desserts? The medieval palate was certainly different from ours. Refined sugar was a luxury, incredibly expensive and used sparingly, mostly by the very wealthy for elaborate showpieces rather than everyday consumption.